Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast dedicated to exploring the innovative minds and business models shaping our transition to a circular economy. I'm Gar Punnett, CEO of LoopLayer.
I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at SpareTech.
This episode's a little bit of a special one for probably a couple reasons, none of which include your new background that you got to redo here for your home studio.
Very happy about it.
Yes, you're always an inspiration. We're modifying, we're changing. However, for two reasons. The first reason is we may or may not be seeing you consistently.
Right.
So
I am 10 days away from being a mom.
Yeah, that's big.
10-ish.
Yes. Yeah, if nobody can tell from sort of chest down, there's probably big changes here. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, so 10-ish days out, which means you're going to be in
Take
and
a break.
out. Yes.
Yeah.
If you're feeling up for it, you'll join the interview. If not, then you'll skip it. So you're stuck with me, but you'll get Sabira when she's up for it, and it will happen eventually too. She'll come back in whatever role she feels like.
Looking forward to
However, yes, looking forward to that as well. However, another reason why it's a special episode is why.
Because today we're interviewing my boss, the boss.
The boss.
The boss. Martin, who's our guest today, is the CEO and co-founder of SpareTech, where I now am at. And, joining this company was a really fascinating ride for me because industrial spare parts and industrial waste in general and circularity is a fascinating world. But people don't realize how hidden and convoluted this problem is in manufacturing. And yeah, there's a lot of meat to work with there. So manufacturing companies across the globe are sitting on warehouses of spare parts to make sure that their factories keep running. And we're talking multiple big football fields worth of spare parts. You walk into a room and there's just stacks on stacks on stacks of spare parts. And they don't move. They're barely used. This is I often joke that there are different warehouses. There's the Louis Vuitton warehouse, there's the Coach warehouse, there's the Walmart warehouse, because they just have different qualities depending on the machines that they're running.
Oh.
And yeah, and there's some of them are really high value parts. Some of them are just your casual, you just need to take it off the shelf.
Your commoditized parts.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And it's all an insurance policy, right? They invest so much in this factory machinery and they don't want a situation where a part breaks and they don't have it to get the machine back up and running.
So therefore, you just need stacks and stacks of parts ready to go just in case.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers y'all are sharing in this episode are pretty staggering. How a single large manufacturer with a few hundred sites might potentially have $500 million worth of spare parts inventory. And those are just numbers that you just can't quite really imagine and really understand. And so that scale really is just, again, is across the industry. And so whether you're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars really of dormant assets, things that have value and tradable value, which we'll get into, that asset value worldwide.
Yeah. And what is, if you think about parallel circular industries like fashion or any other kind of material, you have the same overall frameworks. You have high value goods, low value goods, high volume goods, low volume goods, right? So the parallels are still there. It's just kind of this weird hidden world. So anyway, so Martin takes us to his OG days of starting this company, and he was working at Porsche, where he was tasked with figuring out what the spare parts inventory should look like for a new factory. And so he tells us about what he saw in those warehouses, how him and his co-founder, Lucas, decided to leave their jobs and tackle this problem. And they've been working on it for 7 years, and they haven't really pivoted that much. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool story.
That. Yeah, I love that part of the conversation. We get into what it means to be a German actually, in the American, so being German and then across the Atlantic, and some sort of maybe surprising advice about what it means to be the German in the room when selling to American manufacturers. I loved his take.
Let's get into it. Let's start before the beginning. Well, first of all, we work together, which is
That's a good
very cool
disclaimer.
to have you.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, yeah.
We work together. You're the CEO of SpareTech, which is very cool to have you on. I first of all, I want to say industrial spare parts is a weird niche. And when I was like in conversations with y'all about joining the team, I was like, what is this world? And then like once you get into the world, it's huge, it's deep, and it's been there for a long time. And people kind of just don't know about it. I think the general population just doesn't know about this world. And so you and Lucas worked together, and Lucas, your co-founder, and you had this like peek into manufacturing operations. Tell us about how you thought that this is a world worth chasing. Like, what convinced you?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me, and great to have you in the team, Severo. And I think one of the reasons probably you got excited, but we got excited really back in the day was that we just thought it's a really, really big opportunity, and it feels like kind of a really untapped business that has a lot of potential. And this is why, while having great jobs back in the day was actually at Porsche, we had, great jobs in manufacturing ourselves. It was very tempting because the opportunity was so big. And I think that helped us throughout this journey as well, that we really came from that market. We really understood that dynamic, and we really kind of just progressed at building the same thing since the start. So if you look at like the early prototypes of what we tried to achieve, it's the same thing that we have today. It's literally 101. So we never really pivoted, or so we just executed on the same problem.
That's
For
kind of
7
rare.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of rare.
Yeah.
So tell us, like, what did you actually see? Like, what
Yeah.
was telling you, oh, there's a problem here that the opportunity is big?
Yeah, so I think that, like, to give some context, and as you said, it's not like it's a kind of niche space, and I think none of us really, started our career saying we want to be spare part software builders, and so that's not that hasn't happened. But
Yeah.
what we saw is that there's just like to give some context, but these manufacturing companies, they produce something, and most of the things that we have in our hands are produced in a factory, right? Is it like a phone, a car, a laptop? Even if you put a frozen pizza into your oven, right? It's all things that are produced in the millions. And a lot of times when this happens, there's a factory that produces these things, and it's very expensive machines. And what people do to overcome that these machines are down, they put spare parts into their inventory as an insurance that if the machines go down, you can react quickly. And what we specifically saw back then was huge warehouses, huge warehouses filled with parts, multiple football fields big, and they would not move. It was a big insurance across the whole industry, and it would not move. So you really have dust sitting on these parts because somebody bought it just in case and really never got to use it because it's an insurance for the case when it fails. Yeah.
I was reading a post, I think, and that was what really I think was the light bulb for me. I think you had actually posted it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago talking about insurance and how you
Right.
think about the factory and not necessarily how you're going to live in and operate. You're just trying to get it up and running.
Right.
And then that insurance thing is that thread that is sort of overlooked in how it's going to run and how efficient you can be with your spare parts.
Exactly. That was like a first-hand experience, which was most forming for me. So I was back in the day, we were tasked with building a new Porsche factory. So really, it was a green field, and there was a new car back in the day that was built. So it was a huge project, and even we brought in like 60 or 70 different lines at that time. And I was actually tasked with making sure that we have the right spare parts on hand. So what would happen is that I had a team of about 10 people manually going through these data sheets, trying to understand what do we actually need, what are the parts that are critical, and what needs to be on hand. And the big issue there was it was like hundreds of thousands of potential parts. So how do you analyze this? How do you do this? It's all very manual. And at the same time, and this is an interesting nuance to this industry, is there is a lot of intransparency in spare parts because it's a pretty important business model for a lot of the people in the spare part business, which makes it um, interesting because it's kind of like information disguised in a lot of senses.
And what's interesting is if we draw parallels, like if you leave the industrial part agnostic, right? We think about the problems in our consumer electronics. We've been talking about like the right to repair, right? For your phone. Like what do you need to be able to do that? You need the information on how, like, you need the part, you need the information, you need how to actually repair it and the tools available to repair it. And now you start to see and uncover in this industrial world, you actually have the part. You will have the engineering expertise
Right.
on even how to use it, but you don't have the basic thing of like, what is this part? And is this part that I'm holding in my hand the same as this other part? And it's because of this intransparency that you're talking about, which like blows my mind. And I think the other thing that blows my mind, you have consumer electronics, and then you think about that in a factory, you're thinking hundreds of orders of magnitude of difference in terms of environmental impact, which is just, I don't even know. It's wild.
And I think, and I would love a reaction from either of you and Martin specifically of, I mean, I don't think consumers, and I don't think we've only started to touch, and I was starting to touch really manufacturing-based decisions and the magnitude of time down of when something isn't running, how important it is to get it up and running. But I just didn't know how critical that was in terms of cost. And so that's really the component here. And that's where I think sort of the layperson who goes like, well, this isn't that big of a deal. Like, what's the difference? It's like, no, that critical part and that critical decision means millions potentially just racking up that something's not moving.
And Gary, one of the big topics here is really when you are in the factory making that decision, and it's your decision to make if you stock that part or not. That's a lot of pressure on you as an individual, and your job might be on the line if you don't do it right. So, and that leads to a lot of that decision making of, hey, I rather have it when I need it than not
and
having
I love
it.
that might be the person going, I'd rather also have 40. Like, why not? So it's, I think like that's the wild part is people like, I want more insurance than you could ever believe. I'll take 50 of those parts. Like,
and nobody blames. I mean, I mean, we would probably all do the same thing. It's not to blame, on everyone making those decisions on a day-to-day basis because they make the best decision for what they can in that moment. But the issue here is that it's so complex and not very data-driven that in the end of the day, it's a gut feeling, and you're indexing more towards reliability than you are towards, efficiency or sustainability in that sense. Yeah.
So then can you talk about like the solution that SpareTech is and why you think the technology has transformed people who do have that fear, right? Like you're not only solving the data problem, but now you're saying like, hey, person who wants to stock 40, it's okay if you only have 5. Or, like you didn't even know you had 40. You thought you had 20. So like, how do you think that the technology and the human match has come together?
That's such a great emotional point. That like that's bizarre to try to solve for that emotion element too.
Yeah.
It is. And I think that's also kind of coming back to the founder story. One of the really interesting pieces of what you need to sell, you need to be an expert in what you do. And if you cannot if you're not speaking the language, like people will not trust that you actually know what you're doing. And if you call out a part to be the same as a different part, and it's not, when you look at detail, that's trust. And if they lose trust in your solution, it's a very, very um, essential piece of that insurance is that you trust what you're seeing, right? So that's more of the emotional part of that. But I think kind of how we thought about it, and we kind of touched base on this with the consumer electronics. But as you know, when you go in a in the supermarket or whatever, there's a barcode on a part, right? So you can identify a part pretty easily. You have the number, a global number that identifies a product, and that's not the case for parts. And that's one of the most crazy complex things that I have seen, which seems simple, but it's not. So if you look at 10 parts, they might look exactly the same from the outside. There might be just a nuance in the way it's described on like a nameplate, and it's completely different part. And that's a case for like motors and all of these things, which are very individual. So you can have billions of different configurations of such a motor. And if you then say they're all the same, it's just not the case. So what we truly try to focus on and really put a lot of effort and build a solution was around identification of spare parts and making sure that people get reliable information about what they have in their hand and what they do. And ultimately, what we try to achieve there is that they know what they have. It's as simple as that. At the end of the day, it's know what you have, right? What are the parts in your storeroom? What are actually those parts? What alternatives you can use, you can get, and giving them this visibility, not only in their, as you know, as the industry called it, their storeroom, but across all the storerooms in their network. This is basically the overall first step that we took with the technology, is kind of just helping them understand what they have and where they can get it.
I'm getting a probing question to come around digital storerooms and sharing storerooms. I feel like we're getting to that, but that's going to be a great great topic, but not right now. I'm curious about, actually, I was seeing some visual indicators. I want to better understand and maybe make it clear for the audience. Visual indicators on products or on components, on parts, or can you help us understand, where does this data come from? Like, where is it sitting now, where you're ingesting some sort of data and being able to connect the dots and differentiate components or parts and help then your client do that? Because I'm sure that's applicable in so many industries when you have just multiple SKUs and different sort of spreadsheets and data sets. So yeah.
So one of the really key things that we've built at SpareTech is a catalog of more than 40 million spare parts, like common parts that exist in the world, where it's kind of like a library, a reference, right? Where we say, this is exactly the manufacturer of the part, this is what the part looks like, this is a picture, description, and those are like the suppliers where you can buy it. And that reference is a key asset to SpareTech, and we can only build it by combining some of the data layers that we'll touch in a second. So, but that's kind of like the core underlying data layer. And that data layer gets fueled with different sources, basically. And we can go into that a little bit, where we source it and how we match it up.
I'd love to know where that comes from. I'm also curious, what was that data layer has to be jump started. What was that first set of data that allowed you to go, okay, we have some sort of set of confidence here in what we're doing with that? How did you, because I'm sure there's listeners here who are like, how did you convince someone to let you do this? How did you convince them to become your client when you didn't have data set number one? You had data set 0. What was that first beginning sort of start there?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let's get it. And we actually, that's the first thing we did. We started, and that's the interesting piece about SpareTech. We started with the data layer, and then we built the use cases around it. So the initial, so first of all, those are products that are sold, and there's a manufacturer that produces those products, and there's a catalog out there that this manufacturer has. And either this is like out in the public, it's online shops, it's PDF files, or it might be something hidden behind a more, behind the gates, basically. But what we really early started to do is not just scrape the internet and kind of say, hey, this is what it is. But what we actually did is we approached all those manufacturers and we told them, what we secure you is we bring your information to the end customers, to the large manufacturers. And this was obviously like the chicken egg problem here. And what we did is we just started in our industry, which we do auto. We went in there, pitched the product, got a couple great logos to start with, and then we used those logos to approach the left side and basically tell them, hey, we want your catalogs in there, and it's for free. So everyone that provided those catalogs to us didn't pay any money. We made the money with all the large manufacturers that were that were able to optimize their inventory and their spend with that data, right? So it was kind of a unique approach because I think a lot of the other teams that started in that space wanted to monetize more the supply side of the platform, basically.
Yeah, that one more, Sabira, if you may, because this is very interesting. Because then that seems like that first trust layer. Now you're talking about trust with your clients on a whole nother level, but just the trust from those first logos. What did you say? What did you do? Why were you all the special ones where they went, we trust these folks? Like, was this Porsche because you were sort of doing Porsche consulting and there was an in there? Was that
right?
How did that work? How did you sort of get over that hump a little bit?
Yeah, so actually, one of the first 5 customers was Porsche, but the other 4 were truly like cold source, basically, like really cold outbound, got into the like paper industry, a supplier, like we had no connections whatsoever. And I think the reason for that and we started with not having a product, right? So we would basically do in Excel files and whatever, behind the curtains, we would make it work for them, but always with the intent to build that data layer first that we could then accelerate to bring to the market. And this is kind of how it worked. And I guess, they trusted us with our experience that we have, and we were great sparings partners for them early on. And then you need to find those customers that are just also, essentially putting money into 2 dudes, that are saying that they have software here. So it's like, you need to have those in there to make it work. And we found them. Even in Germany they exist. So that was amazing. And then we could build it from there. Yeah.
And the only reason I bring that up is it's so good for audience members to hear this, to go, well, I could be that dude. Like, if you have if you can think you can do it, you can cold call and get in there and try to figure something out with somebody. It's possible still.
And there's just a funny anecdote, and this is why I'm also, a big believer of, like if you have that domain knowledge and that kind of an excitement for the domain and you're really passionate about this, then I think there's a lot of, just good things that follow. But one of the funny stories is we were one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world, and we kind of present our solution, and I have my back basically against what is projected from them. And then they talk about like these issues they have. So I come up with an example and say, what we usually see is that specific part category is a huge issue. And at the same time, the person who was presenting pulled up exactly the same part behind me of what I was talking about. So when you're sitting in a meeting like that with one of the largest manufacturers in the world, it just gives you that credibility of they know what they're talking about. I think this really helped us to, to build that initial trust, I would say. Yeah.
I mean, we were joking. I think trust is important, but we were also joking before we started recording that like consistency is also key. And that's like, I think I admire how much like you have that initial drive and passion for the industry, but also the consistency over time. I don't know if there's not necessarily a question there, Martin, maybe it's just like what has helped you stay consistent, especially like if the early years were challenging or difficult at all, like what has kept you motivated?
It's a great. We're 7 years in, and I think we just launched just the last couple of days. We just recap one of the biggest years in SpareTech history. We're gonna we right into stepping in one of the biggest growth stories of our history. So it's kind of I think that the thing that keeps me motivated, and it may sound kind of cheesy, but it's like it's really not solved in a way, right? It's not done in a way. We have, a good amount of customers, it's like, but it's maybe like 5% of the market. maybe it's even only 2% of the market that we're currently serving. So our impact is really, really low. And I just think that and that is actually one of the things that we don't lead much with when we sell, but like Lucas and my vision of the company in a lot of ways and where the industry needs to move is that there's more sharing, right, of parts. And like they're all the same parts. Everyone uses them. Why does everyone keep their own stuff? Like it doesn't make any sense, right? So that's like um and our long-term vision with that is zero waste industrial sharing is kind of our term that we have with that. And that's like bold and ambitious. But what we've also learned is that we don't lead with that when we go to a customer. We lead with solving their pain points. And this kind of, helps us on a day-to-day to get to that vision. And I think it feels like just not close to being done. And I just, also bringing now the business from Germany to the US, there's like a new whole other market that we are serving now for a couple of years, which has been a fantastic experience. So it's just, not being done and like having like the bigger picture in mind, I would say is really what drives me or us
Well,
as a founder team. Yeah.
I love that vision. I think it's very similar. I think many people's journey in selling solutions that have that type of vision, that is both. I mean, I'm very much on the same page here. I'm a dreamer. I see the vision, and some label it as idealistic, but I go, no, there's actually just a couple steps we need to get through, and then this is very real. And so
Right.
I think what I love in hearing about how you're pitching this, and I'd be curious if you developed this, is you basically said, okay, we can't sell the vision, but we can definitely get their trust and then hold their hand, and before they know it, they're at the vision. Like there's just, before they know it, there's been a set of processes that they stepped through, and you made them happy all along the way, and then we arrived here at this great idealistic vision. Did you have to learn that? Was there a pitch at some point where you went, look at this grand vision, and then you were like, we probably shouldn't say that in the beginning. We should probably get them to there, not necessarily say it.
Right. I think we always started with a problem, and
Good.
we always pitched the problem. I think we didn't really have that. We didn't start with the vision, let's say. We started with solving that problem, and we then came up with that vision. And we got really excited about it because the more we saw, like, this is just this is crazy what is happening there, right? And I think that's really what happened. But we, as a company, we really, I can see how that motivates not only us as founders, but more of the team members also in the recruiting and everything that, when we drive towards that vision. But I know I've listened to your podcast as well, where you talk about this, that it's important, to solve a real pain point. And if I, talk to a leadership of a large manufacturing company, what they will tell me is, my pain point is that I have too much inventory on stock and my capital is allocated in this inventory that I'm not using. So how can you help me, essentially, to avoid that happening again in the future and to make sure that I don't have as much capital on my balance sheet? And that's a very solvable problem. But if you solve that in a real way, what will happen is that there's just much more of that vision becoming reality.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's I
was going to say, take me to that reality, because I'm really curious. Okay, I thought you would.
So,
yeah, go for it.
Help us connect the dots here, Martin. So you're talking about the early product vision and the customer pain point. So now when they come together, what benefit, how does having the data help the customer? And how does it help them solve this? I have too much inventory sitting on my shelves. What does the value look like then as a result?
Right. So if you look at it from from three angles, basically, what we tried to provide in the end of the day is like a holistic solution of one, what I just described, where we started is kind of like knowing what you have. The other one is you need to get what you need when you need it, right? So really making sure that you have a new machine, you have new equipment, you need to understand like, where do I get it, and do I even need to buy this? And then the last piece of the equation is really selling what you don't need, getting rid of everything that is not longer needed. So I think those are like the three core elements. And what this comes down back to is, what we describe internally as more like you call it kind of like a magic shelf that, like, you have the part when you need them, they're available when you need them. but you don't need to stock them for years without usage, right? So there's better ways how to do that. And if we think about that kind of bigger concept, then if a customer operates like that, in the end of the day, you will have less inventory. So the benefit is very clear that you're not carrying as much parts. The second thing is you will not buy what you don't need. So you will think about, do I have internal resources where I can get this part from other factories in my network before buying it myself? Do I really need to buy 40 of those, or can I just put 5 in the inventory for now? And can I somehow make sure before I throw all these things on landfill, is there someone else out there in the market that can actually reuse what we have not been using, right? So, and this, tracks down the inventory really specifically. And the second thing is, with that transparency, you're actually reducing the amount of money that you spend every year on spare parts. And that's like a really tangible, business outcome. How much money did you spend last year, and how much money are you spending on the same parts this year? And this is like the true beauty of SpareTech, is to have that clarity and business case and really ROI from what we do.
When will the user, I mean, is this already happening? And maybe I don't know this, so I'd love to know
Right.
this. But when are these users, these clients of yours, flipping the switch towards the digital storeroom and
Right.
being able to say, oh, I don't know if my neighbor has this, potentially a competitor. I trust in SpareTech. I trust that I can procure it from somewhere in this network. Is that happening? Has this,
Right.
or is this now started a progression into that vision where you're connecting these storerooms to one another?
Right. So the reality of what we are already able to do, and it's a pretty fast time to value for the customers, is actually just giving them visibility of their internal storerooms,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
just imagine those large manufacturers we talked about earlier. They might have like 50, they might have 80, they might have a few hundred plants worldwide, and some of them, a few dozens might be in the US. So we see that a lot of customers even struggle with that. What is my internal availability of that part? And I think this is something where, like right off the bat, as soon as we see data, they get that visibility, and
Yes.
that's like it's there and they use it, and it's like internal reuse in the end of the day, right?
It
Yeah.
I would love to hear from your mouth, because I think I've said it into this microphone too many times. When you explain that to people,
Right.
doesn't it blow your minds? Doesn't it blow their minds? Where it's like, wait, people, like, whenever I explain internal reuse to folks, they're like, wait, how do organizations not know what they have? And it's like, I mean, do you get that reaction from folks still?
I mean, yes, we do. And I think but I think if you really look at what's happening there is what, okay, one is like you don't know it, right? You really just don't know because you cannot access that information. It's not visible to you. You have a system that's limited to your factory. It's just not, you cannot, even if you would, you don't have the information. And what will happen, and this is like 2026 reality, is those companies, they will send a large email to all the plants in the world and say, do you have this part available? Does anyone have this part? It's like an email with, 40, 50, 60 people. And they just ask for it. And then what happens? Every one of them goes into their system and looks for the part they cannot find. So one is really, um, do I have access to that information? How easy is it for me to get it? And then secondly, if I understand that there is a part I can use, you have that kind of, hey, line is down situation where you will just get it. But the other one is like, do you have an agreement with that other plant on how you're sharing all of this? So then all of a sudden you're back to the question of, okay, how many do I need? How many do I want? What's my own insurance I have? So you then have the emotional piece next to kind of the information piece. So I think that's why when you're in this for so many years, you kind of really ask yourself, okay, why is it happening? But when you kind of go deeper and try to really unveil it, a lot of times they just don't see it and they don't have the right tools. And secondly, it is like maybe they just don't want it, right? Maybe they have just different priorities.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
classic, it's not totally their job. to be considering
Yeah.
the other parts of the business.
Yeah.
Like it's their job to think about this part of the business.
Right.
Exactly.
And actually, if you think about like the history of technology adoption in these contexts, right? Like that to me is when you come in 2026 and we're like using all the modern tools in our daily lives, and then you go into this factory and they're like using SAP, like these are in like the automotive industry, right? Like so progressive in terms of lean manufacturing and like informed decision making just in time. And they still have these like old investments that they've made in technology. And now we're kind of seeing like a wave of like, okay, we need to revisit this the data the way that we structured our processes and the way that we operated. And so maybe Martin, you can talk about like, what are the broader trends? Like, are you seeing the age of people change and therefore the thinking change and therefore the technology change? Or is it something else like the economic pressures that force the rethinking of like, well, we did SAP like this for 40 years, like what is really like, besides the emotions and the availability of technology, what is driving any change?
Yeah, I think one of the core things that drives it, and I think it goes back to this business thing, is really like the pressure on businesses right now. They just need to basically improve their margins, so they're looking for ways to save money. And I think what we always see, and we did like actually a big survey there around 300 manufacturing executives just last year. It's like it really feels like an under invested category that a lot of people have not seen as a cost saving opportunity in the past, but more a necessity to kind of keep their machines up and running while there's a lot of inefficiency. So I think in the end of the day, why we see so much traction right now and we see that the market is really picking this up is, I think, really business demand to improve their margins. And then they think about, okay, how can we solve this? Well, we need to digitize the factory. So there's probably manufacturing software is one of the hottest things you can do these days. And where people still sell a lot of product, they still make a lot of money, and it's going to take some time till that is adopted. So I think it's a really interesting piece of the industry which just sees significant growth because top down the management decides, hey, let's invest into digitalization, and they need to, because that's the last point you made, Samira. Like, the workforce has a lot of tribal knowledge there, and they kind of have everything in their heads. There's a lot of aging workforce in that sector, and you need to make sure that that information, that knowledge gets into systems that can actually use it, and make sure that others can profit from that. So I think that's one of the key things there, which also manufacturing leaders understand, that they have a pretty big issue there on the shop floors.
When it comes to these types of solutions, we'll just go new software solutions, so something new. I'm curious. I mean, at what point did you all make the decision? And I'm curious what that decision was, because I don't know this. To not integrate with something, to not, because I'm sure you got that pressure along the way, which is, we have these systems. Do you all plug into these? Did you go, yes, we will plug into these, or go, you know what, we're a little bit different. We can lay on top of them, but we don't need to focus our energy on integrating with these sometimes antiquated digital infrastructure. I mean, when did you make that decision? What decision did you end up making?
Yeah, so I can touch on it. Maybe so you can share a little bit on top. But I think the core thing which we need to understand is these companies are running, and they have been running for a long time, and they have been out there. So if you sell into large manufacturing, there is a ERP system, there is SAP in place. So if you start trying to replace those, you're in a very bad spot, like generally speaking. Like, I think that's kind of like what we learned really early.
Yeah.
If I'm selling like into small businesses, they might not have an ERP system. That's a completely different story, and there might be other solutions that focus on this.
People are very protective of their ERP solutions. They don't touch them. Yes.
And it's the thing. I mean, and when you have worked in that industry, you know why. Like, if you mess this up, it's gonna have a lot of consequences. So these like ERP transitions, are crazy. And so that's like number one rule. don't try to not rebuild stuff that already exists and works. But exactly like you said, Gar, like we really try to put a kind of an intelligence layer on top of what the existing ERP system does, because we just think with kind of the context data that we have, that database, and how we can make sense of that, there's just a lot of intelligence we can provide. And I think the biggest value that our customers have seen is actually when they start from getting value quick, doing a manual data exchange, for example, like just showcase the solution, showcase the ROI, and then move into more of a automated data exchange over time is like the playbook essentially that we have applied, and it has worked. But obviously our goal also to be integrated well into these companies is that we are part of their day-to-day activities. And if you're doing something day-to-day, you want to make sure that the data is in sync. And technology has played a huge role in that with all the API stack that exists basically. So it's not unsolvable, but you're reliant on a lot of the resources in these enterprises to make that work, which can be quite challenging. So there needs to be a different path to start off.
Yeah, and I think just to add, what I really loved about SpareTech when I joined is that what you described as a solution, Martin, is just really like the foundation, right? We have our catalog. We can tell you when you send us your material master of all the parts that are in your storeroom, not necessarily your inventory, just like the list of parts that you think that you have. We can tell you, oh, okay, these two different parts that you think are different are the same. Great.
Right.
Like you already have that intelligence. But what we do is when we say we lay on top of or have data sync with our customers, we also help them prevent buying the same thing again, because any new list that they're getting, they're checking against their own list. And we have the technology to do that. But how do you keep that live and keep their part list up to date is through like automated data exchange and through APIs. So that's where we do have this like point of connection, but we're not trying to displace. We're just trying to make more informed, intelligent decisions because you have data that you didn't have before. And there's no reason for every single auto company to try to build this database, right? Like we're here and we're going to do the work for you. And now you can leverage it in a way that helps you prevent unnecessary spend.
I'm saying this now as a disclaimer to the audience and to anybody who's listening that this is not reflecting of any SpareTech views of Sabira or Martin. It drives me crazy though to think that we are now just at a point and maybe AI will change this. So maybe this is an interesting take where we have integrated solutions at the digital infrastructure level that are just now baked in forever. Like, are we just always going to be building on top of SAP? Are we always going to be building on top of some type of large ERP system and they're just always going to be there? And I think that's fascinating to me is like, how do you get to that? Like, did they get to that level because they were the first ones in the 70s? Like, is that just where we are now? And will AI change that is really my question that I'm going to be pursuing for the next 10 years anyway. So, I mean, I'm just fascinated by that level of infiltration. I mean, that's the thing I'm fascinated
about. I have a take on that. So I think when you are a CIO of a large company, enterprise manufacturer company, what you hate right now is that since 10 years there's point solutions for every small problem.
Yes.
Also spare parts management. And you're trying to integrate all of these systems and they're all a risk potentially to your whole ecosystem. So as a CIO, you actually try to reduce the number of solutions that your team uses, right? And the and that creates a situation, but at the same time, these large legacy players don't have the focus. And so the interesting thing is how will AI change that? And I think there is if you fast forward 5 to 10 years, I think it will change for sure, because it's like in the end of the day, a lot of the workflows that happen, they can be in one kind of UI layer, but I think the really interesting piece is the data layer and the context and the logics behind that, because that needs to be trained in a way.
Yes.
that it does the same, it brings the same value. So I think this is where a lot of the SaaS solutions, including SpareTech, need to think about how are we actually, how is that going to look like for us? And I think data is a big differentiator. That's why I'm quite excited about the position we're in and where we play, because I think it's actually gonna build into the future very well.
I do want to, before we approach the end of our time together, I have one kind of like market and company growth question for you, Martin, because I think you might be our only guest who has brought a company to the US from abroad. Like we've talked to
Yeah.
some foreign companies, but
Yeah.
nobody that has grown
Right.
across the Atlantic. And so, can you just talk a little bit about the differences and similarities between selling in Europe and selling in the US? Like, what surprised you? What has been challenging?
Yeah. What did you have to
Um,
unlearn too?
yeah,
What you America's
Yeah.
weird.
America's definitely
Well,
weird.
it's I mean, one of the cool thing is we are just surrounded by, great other entrepreneurs or people that have done it before. So we were able to piggyback on a lot of the learnings that others made. And one of the things is actually that relocation of one of the founders into the new market is actually a pretty big success factor for many of if you look at like really historic data on this. And the reason for this is you try to um, protect how you work at the values of the company. You try to protect the product and you try to build something exciting and new. And at the same time, you need to adjust to the market. And I think there is like one of the founders of a really large company told me this funny story is like, when you sell in the US, Americans want to buy from Americans. It's that's what he told me. Like if you were sitting in a boardroom and you try to sell your solution, Americans want to buy from Americans. But it's good if you're the German in the room because then they know it's actually engineered and it's software behind it. So that is like that was like the advice I got, right? It's like, and this is the association that Americans have with German engineering. And I think we have a great product. We focused 3-4 years just to build out one of what I think is the greatest product in this space. But it's this is what we need to really learn. And I'm happy that we have a great team in the US that does exactly that. But this is reality, I would say, in the industry. Yeah.
That's a fascinating anecdote. I have one more that I can't really figure out how to fit in here because this would naturally be a wonderful ending because I think that was a fantastic story. But I'm actually, Sabir, I'd be curious if you remember some of our first instances of seeing this at some of our former clients when we were working at a different company. And I won't name the client, but it was a fascinating problem where they came to us and said, "Hey, we have like all these parts that are from the 80s." And it just so happened that these parts that were from the 80s were still really valuable
Mhm.
because they hadn't actually changed the manufacturing line all that much. And so it still worked. And they came to us and said, "How do you help us find where these valuable 50-year-old components are, 40-year-old components are, and try to connect the dots of this sort of supply chain that was from 40 years ago?" And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And so when Sabira told me about SpareTech, I was just like, that makes total sense. This is the coolest thing because it's crazy that they still have this problem and it's like a legacy problem that just continues to be unsolved, maybe until now.
Yeah, and we'll I mean that's kind of what I was alluding to in kind of like sell what you don't need, right? There is like I think one of the big things that we've learned is that there is not a lot of awareness in the market to the companies we sell to that you can actually do something with those parts that you
Yes.
don't need anymore. And people just, throw them away essentially. That's what's happened a lot of time. It's going to recycling, and they get like a penny on the dollar, but there is actually a pretty um um, like a big market out there of parts that have not been used, which are brought to market again, and you can, get it at a different price essentially. And they might just still be original packaged, and they might have been sitting there for 5 years, and that's fine. And I think that's where, in the spare part industry, and this is something we're really excited about here actually, is that the value of inventory is like really, really high. So if you just take one of those larger manufacturers with, a few hundred sites, they might have like 500, 600 million of parts sitting there, and probably like 100 to 150 million of that part have not been used in a few years, right? So if you kind of compound that up with, just take like the largest 1,000 customers just in US, that's like 100 billion in inventory that you have sitting there, and nobody's using it, right? So those are big numbers, and this is why there is a pretty big secondary market industry, which we are pretty excited about.
There's a future graphic for you all where you have these stacks of piles of money across the world of where things just sit and where they're just like dormant almost and ready to be monetized.
Yeah.
Well, I think like it was also part of what excited me about joining SpareTech is that you think about the history of like fashion becoming circular. Like, why
Yep.
did it become circular? Is because there was a lot of people understood the problem. There were ways of solving it, but it was fragmented, right? Like thrifting is like a local solution. You had your Goodwills, you had your Salvation Armies, but you didn't have ThreadUp, right? You didn't
Hear me
have
out. You
Trove.
also you also have your closets, which
Yeah,
are
exactly,
technically your
right, above
storerooms.
ground
Like,
landfills.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
and you had, like, sharing but, like so it took technology and creative aggregation
yep,
of parts of parts of clothes in order to jumpstart businesses like ThreadUp and like
yep.
Poshmark, right? And so if you think about this in the same way in the industrial spare parts market, like there reuse is happening. It's not penetrated, like, there's a lot more that can happen, but it is highly, highly fragmented, and the scale that, Martin, you're talking about is it's still a huge above ground wasteland right now, right? So, like, technology and information is what's going to help make those decisions easier, and I'm curious, like yeah, like, looking ahead, what excites you about that?
I mean, I think it's just what excites me about that is actually that I've seen it so many times, and it's very hurtful in a way, and to see that being solved in a in a way that really helps a lot of the people out there. And I think there's just imagining there's someone, let's say in a factory in North Carolina right now, they urgently need a part, they cannot get it anywhere, they're completely desperate, and you could just basically like flip it out and say, well, you know here's a part that someone else is not using. It's exactly that part. We know it is. And here's a way that you can actually get access to that is pretty fascinating. I think the overall goal in the end of the day would really be that you don't even get the part in the first hand, right? You don't even put it on inventory. You get it when you need it. That would be, the
Just
kind
in
of
time.
just-in-time spare parts, right? And I think that's an exciting um, overall vision. And I think there will be a company with SpareTech or without SpareTech in 10 years that this is reality. And I think this is what excites me. And I think then we can solve a lot of the downstream effects that this creates on Earth, essentially.
I love it. Thank you, Martin.
What a mic drop.
Yep.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.